In conversation with Cameron Scholey. Cam Scholey was born in Toronto, Canada in 1967 and grew up in and around the area. His first job was teaching at his former high school on the east side of Toronto. Cam then earned a CPA designation and an MBA degree, which he used to begin a hybrid career as a university professor, business strategy speaker, and writer and management consultant. With Toronto as his home base, Cam travels regularly to inspire people to heal, develop, and productively move forward with their lives. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure and joy to have on the show today Cameron Schooley. How are you doing, Cameron?
I'm great today, Peter. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing very fine too. It's lovely to have you on the show today. So lovely. We're going to be having a conversation around your writing.
I'm really excited to be here with you. I love talking to you and I love talking about literature. So this is great.
Absolutely. That's amazing too. So, Cam, could you tell us about your coming of age tale, This Happy Home? And I particularly love that, title for a book cover. And I'd like to ask you, how does this book come about? What inspired you to write a book about your life story?
Yeah, so I'll try to succinctly explain that when I was a young child, I knew what was going on behind our closed doors at home
Mm,
was strange. It wasn't going on at the other kids' houses. I could just tell from a very young age that there was some weird activity, mostly related to my father. And what that turned out to be, I called it weird activity as a child. What that turned out to be was severe bipolar disorder.
oh,
And in the 1970s, that the psychological community didn't quite have a handle on bipolar yet. They called it manic depression, and they were still experimenting with how to medicate. And my father was one of those experimental people, and sometimes the medication wouldn't go well. So I
mm,
grew up with this strange, confusing kind of household. And on top of that, my father was a very violent man at times. And so when you add that to the mix, it makes for a real tough childhood full of hardships, but
mm,
we move on and we persevere. And so I persevered into adulthood. And I thought, I know I have a story I could probably tell about childhood. And then in the late 1990s, this book and movie came out called Angela's Ashes. And it really changed the way I thought about writing a memoir because this fellow in Angela's Ashes, his father's very strange too and does strange, weird things that hold him back from achieving
mm,
his objectives. And
mm.
so I thought, even though his father's problems are different than my father's, the template's almost identical. So when the time's right, I'm going to write a memoir using Angela's Ashes as my loose template. And when the time is right, tends to go on and on and on. I'll make the time, I'll make the time. But when the pandemic came and I was in real isolation, I mean, we all felt some isolation, but I was really isolated. And I decided, hey, this is the time to write that memoir. I've got the time, I've got the mindset. And so I dug in. And in 2022, I started writing my memoir and I finished it just before Christmas of
Wow.
2023.
Wow, that's quite amazing, really. Listening to you talk about this, about your childhood, about the family, it's quite captivating. And I particularly love your cover, your book cover, the house staying at one end and, the flowers or the garden at the other end. And, the title itself saying this happy home already
Right.
sounds a bit figurative and idiomatic to me. This happy home. Okay, what about this happy home? What happened to it? It's that alone to me it sounds a bit captivating. And going through your story, it's also amazing to me. And I particularly love the cover because when I saw it, I was like, this sounds like an amazing memoir. Thank you. It's an amazing work you've got going. Yeah. I'm quite intrigued
Well,
by it. Yeah. I need to mention.
thank you for that compliment. The term "this happy home," that title, I
Yeah.
actually borrowed that from my father, who's passed away now.
Oh.
He wrote a poem called "This Happy Home," and his poem really is about the happiness. But remember, people with severe bipolar, when they're in their manic state, the world's a great place to be and live, and they can
Mm,
accomplish a lot of things when they're in the manic state. And so my father wrote this beautiful poem. And if life was really like what the poem describes life as, the world would be a better place. We'd all be happier people. But
Wow.
the fact is, he would come down into his depression and then the violence would take over sometimes. So my title, This Happy Home, is more foreshadowing than it is about an
Mm.
actual happy home. Because I think most people know this, is that memoirs are not written about happy homes. No one wants to read a
Absolutely. That's why
memoir.
I said it. That's why I said it's figurative. It has an amazing.
Right,
That's an
right. No one's going
amazing
to read a
concept.
memoir about a real happy home. People just living their lives and spending their money, right?
Mm.
It's got to be struggle and things that people can connect to. So that's the
Absolutely.
book, right?
Wow, that's why I said it's quite figurative and sounds to me a bit idiomatic. And I love the cover itself goes alongside with the title Dick's Happy Home. I love the fact that the home stayed in one side of the cover while showing the trees and the grasses underneath. Sounds great. And it can also make
Yeah.
me remember some movies that I've watched in time past of this particular nice setting.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for sharing that.
You're
My father
welcome.
comes from, I'm from the Great Lakes region. So anywhere
Oh,
you are in the world, if you just go to North America and find the Great Lakes, that's where I am, and that's where my father was born, and he's buried in the same place he was born.
oh,
And this house and those clouds look like that area a lot of the time because there's so much water around there that it's
mm,
often overcast. And the
oh.
picture really describes what life looks like in that area.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'd also love to ask you, for readers who haven't read the book yet, and of course, without giving much information away, could we have a sneak of what we'd expect in terms of themes picking up this happy home? Also, how is the book connecting with people?
Yeah, okay, Peter. So themes. So the theme I went into it writing was perseverance. Because
Mm,
the fact is, everyone has setbacks in life. And I believe
absolutely.
setbacks make us stronger,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes too many setbacks that are too large for a little kid can really be overwhelming and really pull
Mm,
them down. So
absolutely.
perseverance is really the main theme of, okay, another setback came my way. What am I going to do this time? And I treat it kind of like an obstacle course. Life's like an obstacle course. So it's like another setback. Do I go around it, above it? Do I dig underneath it? How do I
Mm,
get by? And you try to figure out a way to get by. So perseverance is the main theme of the book. Now, interestingly, I had a professional read it when it was done just to give me some thoughts. And she said, you know that there's a theme of forgiveness in here as
wow.
well. And I said, really? I didn't know that. I'm not complaining. I like it. But can you explain that? And she said, yeah, all the scenes you've written, even the tough scenes, you show grace, you show empathy toward your antagonists.
Mm,
And that made me feel really good because when I wrote the scenes, I decided needed to write them with that kind of compassion, that looking at things from the other person's perspective. Because the fact is in life, no one is as bad as their worst moments, and no one is as great
mm,
as their best moments. We're
mm,
all somewhere in between. So even when I was writing the tough scenes, I tried to remember that this person was good to me sometimes, maybe not in this
absolutely.
moment.
Mm,
And they've got their own struggles, they've gone through their own stuff. So, bottom line is forgiveness was kind of the secondary theme that emerged, and perseverance and coming of age are the primary
wow.
themes. Now, your second question was how is it connecting with people?
Yeah.
I'm going to take you back a couple of years when I was still learning the art of memoir. And so I listened to a lot of lectures by memoirists. I'm a university professor, so I love lectures and that kind of lifestyle. One of the memoirists said that the biggest compliment you can be paid as a memoirist is if someone you don't know or you haven't seen in decades, as soon as you see them, they launch into personal stories
Mm,
after they've read your book. They launch into them. Well, my parents did this, and this happened to me, that kind of thing. Because the reason that's such a compliment is that means that that person truly connected with the book.
wow.
Because if someone opens up to you, gushing right away, it means
Mm,
that their story, it was like you told them personally your story, and now they're sharing back
yes,
with
with
you.
you. Yeah.
Right. So that's one group of people I've connected with is the people who can relate in some way. And then
Mm,
there's this other group of people who are lucky that they didn't go through any of those big traumas in their
mm,
childhood. And I find when I'm talking to them, instead of launching into their personal stories that they don't have about that, they launch into an interview style
Wow.
conversation where they keep asking me, so when this happened, what did you
What do
do?
you
And what
do?
happened here? And I love it. I love when people do that because it
Uh,
again it means that they're connecting with the book.
Absolutely. Wow, that's amazing, really. I so much love your take on this, Cam. Sounds quite pulling, very educative, and quite, intriguing to me as well. So thank you for mentioning. And now let's go to the challenges posed in the process of writing this book, because I know that writing memoir sometimes can pose some challenges, if not many, some. And I'd like to ask you what challenges you experience in the process of writing this happy home. If there is any, could you share with us what challenge it is and how you ultimately overcame it?
There are definitely challenges. The two big challenges I had, one was right off the hop, in that I didn't know how to write memoir. I've been
Oh,
writing for about 25 years professionally,
wow.
but I've written in what's called prescriptive nonfiction. So I have a lot of books and booklets out that talk about corporate strategy. So
Mm,
you want to formulate a good corporate strategy, follow my 6 steps. You want to measure and manage and progress on your strategy, follow these separate 6 steps, that kind of
mm,
approach to things. And that genre is very different from memoir. You don't get a lot of, say, sensory imagery when you're in the prescriptive nonfiction genre. It's more like cookbooks, step one, step two, step
yeah.
three. So the shift over to memoir was very challenging and exciting at the same time. I'll give you an example. When I wrote for corporate life, they used to put word count limits on me. I'd say, if you want me to share all those ideas, I need 5,000 words to do it. And they'd say, you're going to do it in 3,000. And the
Mm,
reason they would do that is because time is money in business, right? So hit the people, give them just what they need to know, the bare minimum. And then when I shifted over to memoir, it's about use all the words you want, just make sure that you're writing a good story and showing, not telling people
mm,
exactly what happened. So there was a transitional period there, which I must say was tough, but I loved every minute of it because I enjoy the field of memoir so much. So
wow.
that was challenge number one, was just shifting into memoir. But I'm a good writer and I love writing, so I managed to do that. The other tough
Yeah.
part, I'd mentioned that there was some trauma in the early days. So the other tough part I experienced was writing some of those scenes, like taking myself back there to
Mm,
write those. Now, I did it from a safe distance. And what I mean from that is in memoir, when you go back to really traumatic memories, you shouldn't relive them. You shouldn't think of them as though you're right in that scene in the moment. You should
yeah.
look at it more like you're sitting on a balcony in a playhouse watching a play from about 40 or
Television.
50 feet.
Yeah.
That's the safe way to go through these memories. But even if you do that, Peter, day after day after day, week after week, it still starts to take a toll on you. And then that's when yoga became my best friend again. And yoga's been good to me for, I'd say, about 20 years. I've been a real diehard yoga fan. But during the pandemic, all the yoga studios were shut down, of course. So I just started doing a lot of yoga on my own. So if a scene was really tough and I just wanted to break away from it, I would go sit for 10 minutes and listen to soft music and focus on my breathing,
Mm.
that kind of thing. So that's how I managed through the other part, the tough parts about writing the tough scenes.
Wow, thank you so much, Cam. But picking up from what you just said, I understand that sometimes it might be very hard. And now I wanted to ask you, does it leave you with some sort of emotional, backdrop? Does it leave you with some sort of, you having to, write this particular story and you flash back to it and wanted to make you say, cry or got emotional? Do you have any sort of that, in the experience of writing the book?
Yeah, it was a very cathartic experience. And
Mm,
sometimes cathartic meant sad. You get pulled back into
yeah.
that world a little bit. But most of the catharsis was about clearing emotional baggage. And
Mm,
I think it started with showing the compassion toward the antagonists, because by showing them compassion and realizing they weren't that bad, these scenes were bad. These things I'm writing about were bad moments, but the people involved aren't necessarily
morally
monstrous
bad.
human beings, right?
Yeah.
And so the process of writing helped me really clear out the emotional baggage and the resentment that I'd held
Mm.
on to for so
Wow.
many decades. And when I
Mm.
was able to clear that emotional baggage out, what that left room for was healing and forgiveness. And
So,
so I didn't plan on this healing and forgiveness entering my soul, but I certainly wasn't going to stop it either. And so I
mm.
found a flood of just healing and forgiveness and good feelings and good thoughts. And back to the secondary theme of forgiveness in the book, I guess that showed through in the
Mm.
book, even though my intentions weren't exactly there. I'm certainly happy that they came through.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I love the sound of this. Sounds quite
Great.
captivating to me. And I'd also like to ask you, Cam, apart from this happy home, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
I do. I'm excited to say that because I'm a university professor for 30
Yeah.
years. So
Oh.
teaching is in my blood now. And what I want to start doing now is teaching beginners memoir. So
Wow.
I'm going to be launching soon an e-booklet on just the basics, just how to get started. How do you get the ball rolling with memoir? Because I know for me, I'm a professional writer. And two
Yeah.
years ago, when I'm going to write a memoir now, my next thought was, what? Where do I start? Oh, I'm intimidated already. And I thought if a professional writer can be intimidated by memoir, certainly
Mm.
beginners are intimidated by memoir. So
Absolutely.
I'm going to make a very non-intimidating, welcome into the shallow end of the swimming pool kind of workbook. And then I'm going to follow up with several workbooks that gradually guide people into the deep end of the memoir pool. And
Mm.
but instead of jumping into the deep end and spluttering and not knowing what's going on, this is a way of gently easing people in to the world of memoir and learning little things at the beginning, like character arc. What's a character arc? Why do you need to build one from the beginning? That type of thing.
Mm. Wow, amazing. I love your take on that. And it's amazing to know you've got some works ongoing. That sounds great to
Yeah.
me. And I'd
Yeah,
like
that's
to,
volume one. Sorry, Peter, just really quick. That was volume one, and then there's going to be two, three, four, based on the feedback I'm getting.
interesting. Wow,
Yeah, what do you want to see next, folks?
that's
Yeah, and that
amazing.
just really quick, I'm going to follow those up with free Zoom classes in May and
Oh,
June because when you read any book, you have questions for the author. Well, I
yeah,
actually want to afford people the opportunity to ask the author the questions that they have.
interesting.
Yeah,
That's an amazing concept. That's a great job you've got ongoing.
thank you.
Well done, yeah. Now, could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? Are there any challenges you've encountered ever since you got published?
Yeah, there are a few challenges with publishing. One is if you want to traditionally publish, meaning you get an agent and they find you a publisher. The
Mm.
issue with that in these days is there's only five big publishers, and there's just such a lineup that they have that it's hard to get on that list if you have a small platform like me. So that was challenge number one. But the beauty of self-publishing becoming something that all of us can do now is
Yeah.
something I want to talk about because I used Amazon, but you don't need to use Amazon. These publishing venues provide people like myself that have a really good story to tell, but
Mm.
no actual platform of people, no fame involved. It's a way to get the story out and try to start small and grow organically. So
Yeah.
that's the challenge is actually trying to get readership of my book being, a little guy from Toronto, Canada. But what I've done is I've cast a really small net around the people that I can relate to, and I'm trying
Mm.
to expand on the reach of the book because it's connecting with everyone that's reading it. So I just want to
Yeah.
try to maximize readership now.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I love the fact that you mentioned that it's connecting with everyone who has read it. That's an amazing one. And one of the
Yeah, it's a
beauty
good
of being an
feeling.
author too. Yeah, it's a good feeling. I love it personally.
Yeah. Well, let me share one other thought. We talked about the challenges of publishing.
Yeah.
When you do self-publish, so it's a great option to have, but when you do, you don't know if your book's really worth reading to
Mm.
people outside of your little inner circle who are going to say nice things about it. So I'm really fortunate. I feel that my reviews on Amazon are 4.9. And
Wow.
everyone that's reading it is really pulling some good stuff out of it, taking something away from it. Good for them, I mean, good for their soul in terms of good stuff.
That's amazing. That's lovely to know. And now, Cam, is there anything that you love to share with the viewers about your memoir that we did not mention in this interview and you'd love the viewers to know?
Yeah, I'd like to let everyone know that if you're interested in writing a memoir, you don't need to commit to writing a memoir right away. You can start with a journal, start in baby steps, write a short story.
Hmm,
So I'm trying to encourage people. Writing is very therapeutic. I guess I should have started with that.
absolutely.
Writing is very therapeutic. So if you have a troubled past of any kind, however long ago it was, just writing it down is almost like venting it out to someone. So I
Hmm,
want to really encourage people to start writing. I'm not a journal guy, so I'm not going to say journal every day. That's not my thing. But if it's your thing, absolutely go for it. But I really want to encourage people to start writing something and try to find the therapy in it for them. Try to find some passion in it as
hmm.
well.
That's an amazing one. Thank you so much. I love the sound of that. And I would like you to read a short section of your book to the audience. It could be a favorite line, paragraph, or page. But before that, I'd like to ask you, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for writers who are still struggling with publishing a book? What would you advise people in this category?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost is look after your psychological safety. Okay. Don't feel that I've committed to writing a memoir. Now I need to delve into some tough scenes. So just make sure your psychological safety is taken care of. I started a
Hmm.
memoir about 20 years ago, and I didn't do it properly in the sense that I went and relived the worst memories, not revisited them. I relived them as though I was in it. And
Wow.
that can really take you backwards because what I found happened was the flashbacks I'd had all my life, they were finally beginning to fade away. They were going away
Hmm.
when I got to my late or my middle 30s. And the problem I created for myself was by reliving those memories, I made those flashbacks nice and crisp and clear again. Big
Hmm.
mistake on my part. So until
Wow.
I learned to revisit those scenes, meaning detach from the tough scenes and revisit
Hmm.
them again, like it's a play going on over there and I'm on a balcony, until I
Hmm.
learned how to do that, I wasn't ready to write memoirs. So my message for people is not to scare them away
Hmm.
from trying this, because if you've got that childhood emotional baggage still, you might want to think about dealing with it anyway. But just be careful delving too quickly, too hard into memoir. That would be one of the biggest things I would recommend for people.
Wow, that's an amazing one. And I so much agree with you. I so much agree with you. And I think all
Yeah.
of these things is something you would love to incorporate in your book, the one you're writing about teaching people how to write a memoir. So that's amazing. There's some things you have to look out for while writing memoirs. Because, you're telling your real life story. And sometimes, like, I interviewed someone in time past, and she was like, she felt naked after a memoir was published. And
Yes.
and I think that's like a feeling that comes with writing memoir because you feel like the
Yeah.
world is reading the story about your life, reading the story about
Yeah.
your family, your mom, your dad, yourself, and both bad and good. You just leave everything out and you felt naked, writing the memoir. So there's a way to go ahead with being naked and being covering of
Yeah.
yourself, and also at the same time, passing all of the information and making the memoir a smooth one.
I love that term because that's how it felt. I didn't think of it that way. I was just using the term vulnerable. But you feel
Uh,
naked when someone you don't know anything about knows your whole life story, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. But the thing is, I signed up for that. And so every time I feel that kind of like, oh, they know way more about me than I know about them. It's like, oh yeah, that's because you wanted them to read your book. This is what you wanted, Cam. So
Absolutely.
I always keep that in mind too, right? Yeah, naked. That's the good term, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's a one that resonates and very deep, thought-provoking as
yes.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
would you like to read a short section of your book to the audience? It could be a favorite line, paragraph, or even a page if you would love to.
Yeah, and I'll set it up a little bit. So I was mentioning my father had severe bipolar before anyone really, even the psychological community, had a handle on what severe bipolar was. And
Mm,
so when I was 12 years old, there was a day I went out with my father when he was at his highest, best mood. It was a great day for us, but I always know those days don't last long, right? Like the
mm,
next day will be a different story. So I'm just going to share a little passage that I wrote about my very last day with my father. That the last
oh,
time I actually spent time with him. I was 12
wow,
years old. Neither of us knew at the time it was our last time together.
wow,
So it was an interesting day when I think of it in retrospect. So let me paint a picture for you.
yeah.
I'm glad to see him looking and sounding so healthy and upbeat. I wish this cheeriness would last, and I don't know why he can't always be like this. But the cheeriness won't last. It never does. Because he is three fathers: the angry, reckless, scary, violent one with the red rage in his eyes, who believes whipping and punching are justified;
Mm,
the sullen, withdrawn one that gets the bad sadness and lies in bed for days and listens to depressing music and won't make eye contact and stares into the corner and talks gloomy talk about dying. And then the third father, the well-meaning, hard-working one who was also a poet with vision and loves his kids and is proud of them and was going to help us out, get us out of the dump on Cockroach Crescent, but never did.
mm,
Probably because eventually this version always loses to the others.
wow,
I don't know what it is the hospital does to make him happy like this, make him into my favorite dad, but I wish they'd make it permanent. Dad and I look at each other, and the glint of gold from his wide, beaming grin makes me tingle because it tells me exactly which version he is right now. Putting his arm around my shoulders, he says, "Come on, let's go." We go back to the car, and I'm ready to enjoy the beautiful weather for as long as it lasts. So that
wow,
was life growing up with a father who I didn't know which father I was getting that day, kind of thing. And through no fault of his own. I mean, severe bipolar is something people are born with. They don't want
yeah,
it, create it. The
that's
real
true.
issue was, yeah, the big issue, I guess, was the violence that went with the bipolar, because you take the confusion of severe bipolar and then put violence on top of it, and it makes
Mm,
for a real challenging childhood.
wow, that's an
Yeah.
amazing
So
reading you've got there.
thank you. Yeah. So just a reminder, that was the very last day I would ever spend time with my
Wow,
father. I would see him a few times after that. And there's stories in the book about when he came back later in our lives. Because what happened shortly after that reading, uh, I was adopted and my last name changed from Waugh, which is my father's name, to a different last name, Scholey. And I grew up those teen years petrified that my father was going to track me down, single me out, and I didn't know what he would do when he found out. To him, it would have been a betrayal for me to change my last name like that, even though I had no choice. I was 12 years old. But
mm,
that betrayal and his violence, I just didn't know what would have happened to me. But I know that I know I imagined a lot of bad things, and that really led to difficult teenage years.
wow. Wow, this amazing story, Schooley. It's a very interesting, captivating, mind-blowing, and compelling stories you've got in there. And I love your reading section, actually. Sounds quite
Oh,
captivating to me, too. So thank you for sharing
absolutely.
this with us.
I was going to say my book should be in the roller coaster section of memoir because
Mm,
it's just
up
like
and down,
this all the way through. Yeah,
with
it's
some
quite a
flow.
story. Yeah, and there's some humor in it. I've talked a lot about the heavy stuff, but there's some humor in it. I get involved
Interesting.
in, I was kind of a reckless, a bit of a bratty kid. So there's some other interesting stories, and I talk about my own worst days in the memoir as well. The first time I was in the back of a police car. Notice I said first time. First time I was in the back of a police car, I was 9 years old.
Oh,
And I wasn't the best kid. And when you're unsupervised and you're a bit bratty, things can tend to go awry.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of interesting stories in there about my own misdeeds and my parents and teachers and principals. It's quite a wild ride.
Interesting. That's amazing. And in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview and would love to get a copy of this happy home, on what platform is it available on for purchase?
Purchase is Amazon, this happy home. But I want to share with people that you can read chapter one for free if you'd like to kind of kick the tires, see if it's your kind of read.
Hmm.
Chapter one is free of charge on my website, which is my name, camscoley.com. No spaces, camscoley.com. There's a bunch of memoir materials on there, but chapter one is one of the things that's available, as well as a couple of trailers, book
Interesting.
trailers. They're video trailers. Yeah.
Interesting. And I left a link in the discussion part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Cam Schooley's book directly on Amazon and also on other platforms. So thank you so much, Cam, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. It's awesome having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for sharing your
Yeah.
work about this happy
Thank
home.
you. Thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Hope to do it again sometime with you.
Absolutely. That would be fun. Thank you so much. This was so amazing. I love your
Yeah.
sound of your book.